Okay, now we enter part 2 on the Green Man and its association with, well, the Green Man myth and Christ myth itself. There are other depictions than this that can be shown of it, but hopefully somewhere deep in that vegetation you can see the essence of what we're talking about. The truth behind the Christ myth, the Green Man and legend of Jesus. Part 2. How did the often used legend of the Green Man eventually become chosen to be the legend of Jesus? Well, let us begin when it was the life story of the ancient Green Man and work forward into the time of the Christian Son of God. The Hindu divine son. When the Greek conqueror Alexander the Great arrived in India, he was surrounded by an abundance of rituals and venerated effigies of a divine son that reminded him of his beloved Dionysus. These reminders were so prevalent that Alexander and his men were eventually compelled to exclaim that, "We know your divine son. He is also ours. We call him Dionysus." This is, of course, hooked up with the Aryans and the reach that Alexander had gone through. In a moment, you'll see him deified in a way, but looking at this vase here, we can see this is Dionysus with his cup and with his staff, which is mainly called a spear. It's a Thracian type spear, so that gives you a little bit of context here. Quite often it's shown with pine cones on the top of it, or some type of grove effigy that's very similar to what we think of as the rod of Aaron, the one who takes over in the Bible. If you look at the bottom of the vase here, you can clearly see there's swastika effigies that are across this too. Along with Dionysus, we get the idea of Pan. Pan, of course, meaning going all the way across. So this connection here. But this Dionysus with his Thracis sphere. And we've talked about Thrace and Thracians and who those were. In fact, so close was the Hindu divine son to Dionysus that a story arose that the Greek son had himself either been born in India or spent much of his early upbringing there before going to Greece. A town named Nyasa, which is the same name as Dionysus' birth town in the west, was subsequently discovered in India, and the divine son of the Greeks and Hindus became synonymous with one another. The name Dionysus denotes the god of Nyasa. So I've spoken before, Dio is God. Our day actually is where it originally comes from, because this all comes from sun worship. So Dios, still in Latin, which was far too telling. It's the reason we don't really use it. But Dio of Nisus. And there's a Nisus river too that's associated with this Nyasa that's in India, or on the edge of it. Problem being now, if I'm correct with it, it all dried up and went away. Much like the one that ran over near Mohenjo-Daro and so on, and made that change happen there too. Yeah, climate change isn't anything brand new at all. In fact, if you look at it over time, it's pretty silly what people are trying to do nowadays. Similar to his counterpart, the forever young and effeminate Dionysus, the Hindu's divine son was the prepubescent Murugan, meaning the beautiful. You can see here him holding his hand up now in a common gesture that was known to him and Proto-Europeans of showing their hand. Not that they had anything with it. People have said it's about 6 fingers and so on. But you can see this gesture reaching much farther than these people by far. Talk about that again in a moment. His other names include Sanat Kumara and Kartikeya, a title denoting son of the Pleiades star system, sisters. Both the Greek Dionysus and the Hindu Kartikeya were intimately associated with the seven sisters who during their infancy manifested physically as their nursemaids. There's a connection. And like Dionysus, Kartikeya Mergon had born from the Earth Mother, which we were talking about before, and the Hindu Shakti, meaning energy, through mating with the invisible Father in heaven, Shiva. So, a lot of connections here with the origins of it. If you were to look at this right here and see this picture, what are you thinking of? See a man that's on a cross. It's got Greek writing on it, and then above it, it has 7 stars. A moon crescent also. But if you look closer and think about it, it almost has the appearance of an anchor. For some people that were quite waterborne at the time. For this, as it says, is Dionysus on a cross with 7 stars of the Pleiades above him. And this predates Jesus by quite some time. Both Dionysus and Mergon became monarchs of the earth, but they were also recognized as the greatest of warriors who carried and fought with versions of their favorite weapon, the spear. Dionysus carried Thrace's spear, and Mergon met his opponents on the battlefield with his Vel spear. Both Dionysus and Mergon eventually became the commanders of great armies of righteous soldiers that fought for Zeus, or Shiva, the Sky Father. Here we see a picture of him with that spear, and if you look at it, this is the pine cone. It's all made of upside down hearts pretty much, and that's what it was before. In the earlier depiction, if you look at it, the staff is sectioned out and it looks like it's made of bamboo. Very much has a pre-looking Buddha type symbol going along with it. Draped over his shoulder is Bambi, or a fawn. Still young with its spots on it, but of course that designates stars. In his left hand is a cobra or a serpent that's shown here too. And again, if we look at the bottom of the vase, you can see swastikas for him in there, along with crosses. This really wasn't anything that was bad, just not long ago. Again, we get this hand effigy, which sometimes they had used paint and dyes and so on to make pictures into their hand, which had symbols that were greeting symbols to these type of people. But again, we see that same symbol that some of us would also think of as the Indians of Americas, the Amerindians, greeting everyone with how and showing up their hands. It's like this. Here you can see it's got the halo around it we're all familiar with, that spear of destiny that we were talking about in a few other videos. Behind the adolescent, forever young, is the peacock, symbolically grasping the snake, which is a cobra, of course, in India at this point. And so we have something that's very much like the eagle and the snake of the Americas, which has also been seen in tales through Sumeria and all types of places. But in this version, it's showing something a little more straightforward with the phoenix idea and the snake that we've talked about before. Let's make another statement. When Columbus made his way across to the Americas, and people try to say nowadays that he was going to fall off the end of the earth and all this kind of silly stuff, he already knew where he was going. And when he ran into people that held up their hand in this type of situation, that had darker features and straight long hair, He knew where he was, or he thought that he knew where he was, and naming them Indians was not the mistake that they tried to give you for it. But it was a mistake, wasn't it? Or was it? For that same symbology was in the Americas of the swastika, all the way up until World War II, whenever all of a sudden that had to be blotted out. This gesture right here of how the people meeting like that, whenever Columbus would meet them in the New World, he thought he knew he was running into, and he also thought that he was going to find some other people that were more like him. They were leaders of big cities that he had perhaps heard about. I did a recent video, and it'll be out right before this, showing you that ideal. That's Mergon in his Vel spear. Hey, solar heritage of Mithra. While Alexander and his men were linking Kartikeya and Dionysus together, the counterpart of these two divine sons was being venerated in both India and then Persia. This was the christened son, Mithra. The name Mithra denotes friendship, contracts, mediation, and balance. It also connects to mother rather than actual father. But then we can have something like a mama's boy. Strangely, if you look at this, they tell you that this is Mithra, or Mithras, the conflagration. If you look close enough, you can see a 4 horsemen. If you look closer, you can see the Statue of Liberty. If one looks closer, you can see Alexander is Mithras, which is the sun being pulled across on its chariot. But that depiction there was something that was being conflagrated with the idea of Sol and Victus. Sol meaning sun. We still have that solar. It refers to the balance that is created through the union of the universe, male-female polarity, kind of a yin and yang. Like Kartikeya and Dionysus, Mithra was a product of the universal polarity. His mother was of the earth, and his solar father in heaven was known by the name of Ahura Mazda. Both Mergan and Mithra explicitly displayed their solar heritage through their distinctive solar flags, as well as by counting the colorful cock as their most sacred animal. The chicken, the rooster, effectively, recognized worldwide as the quintessential solar animal, the cock daily crows to ensure the rising of the morning sun. We have that even in the Bible, where rooster's gonna crow 3 times and stuff. But roosters were, of course, another one of the domesticated animals. So we'll go back up here and take a look at that. In a minute we'll get another depiction, and you'll see that it also connects to a rooster, which can be a version of the phoenix or the peacock of 100 eyes watching over you, just as the American pheasant was seen in such. Here we can see Mithras over here on the left, and you can see that he actually is wearing pants, along with these other people that are in Persia at this time. If I'm not mistaken, this is Mithras and Ahura Mazda, holding that sacred ring that you know of from the Sumerians somewhat, but there it looks like a Christmas wreath with this bandolier hanging down below it like a stretched out pyramid. And the man on the right is Darius. This is what's known as the Tak el Bastan, or the Behistan inscription is put right next to here, where he claims he was an Aryan of Aryan heritage, but that, of course, is the nobility of these people at this time in this area, just like we were talking about in India, some of the places of the Orient, and other places. Mithra was eventually taken west by the Persians and then became known as Mithras. The beloved monarch, warrior, general of the Roman legions, Mithra as Mithras, became identified as the spirit embodied by the Roman emperors who sat upon the throne of the world while proclaiming themselves to be its universal king. You see, there were still god kings going on at that time, and divine heritage and all of those things, of course, going on at this time. By another name, Mithras was Sol Invictus, an epithet synonymous with the solar father in heaven. In order to honor his beloved Mithras, the Emperor Charlemagne chose this day, Sunday, the day of the sun, to be the holiest day of the week. In fact, how we refer to them is all by days, even though only about half of it is a day, and then the other is the night, showing you another symbology that's kept. But the day before Sunday is another god that was worshipped heavily through the entire area, and you know him as Saturn. So we have Saturn's Day, or Saturday. It has to do with satyrs, too, which are goat or faunish type people who look like Pan, who have more of a connection with Pan and going across certain areas than you would think. But the rest of the days of the week, too, are sacredly kept. Monday has to do with the moon, so the moon and sun are in concert. And that's the first thing they tell you in all the ancient rituals that you invoke first. Then we have Tuesday, which is the Celtic type god. Wednesday, which is Woden's Day. And again, we have something from Proto-European spread across. Thursday, which is Thor's Day. Freya's Day is Friday. We're back around to Saturn's Day, and the week rolls around. But then again, with that solar cult that all made this up in the first place, it's all about the day anyhow. It's on your birthday, even if you were born at night, isn't it? Jesus, our incarnation of the Green Man. Now it's time to draw in the legend of Jesus, believed to be the Christian Son of God who remains today one of the last incarnations of the ancient Green Man. His rise to fame began at the height of Mithras' popularity, and when a future Roman soldier named Saul, now it's spelled S-A-U-L, but we get Saul Invictus Saul, was born in Tarsus of Cilicia, the great bastion of Mithras worship in the Middle East. From a young age, Saul, or Paul as he became known, was indoctrinated into the mysteries of Mithras by the Roman soldiers whom he daily served as their tent maker and repairer. While growing up in Tarsus, Paul learned from these soldiers that Mithras had been born in a manger to a virgin on December 25th. After 3 days of going into a false labor and real labor and having the baby, and that he was surrounded by shepherds at the time, he learned that Mithras was one with Ahura Mazda and the Father in heaven. So that sounds familiar too. And had arrived on earth to do so and do his Father's work. He was considered as a savior, and he was informed that after a prolonged battle with Ahriman, the evil one, Mithras gathered together 12 devotees for a last supper. Man, this sounds familiar. During which communion of wine and bread representing his blood and body were consumed by all those present. I seem to remember something about that. Mithras died soon after this event, but then he arose from the dead 3 days later. Then, while preparing for his ascension, Mithras prophesied his return at the end of time for one last battle against Ahriman. Sound like Armageddon? When Paul was old enough, he was sent to Jerusalem with other Roman soldiers to guard some of the Jewish temples in the city, and according to early Christian historian Epiphanes, Paul was not a Jew when he subsequently arrived in Jerusalem, but converted to the faith after falling in love with the daughter of a Jewish priest and seeking her hand in marriage. When his proposal was subsequently rejected, Paul took out his rage on many Jews, including the Ebionites and the Poor Ones, a Jewish sect that championed the life story of a recently deceased Jewish holy man named Yeshua ben Joseph, who is hooked up with the Essenes, who I talked about in a recent video, but Yeshua cognates to Esus. When Paul learned of the entire legend, he soon began to associate Yeshua with this Persian son. His suspicions of their special link grew stronger when he remembered the Persian prophecy that Mithra would return to the earth at the end of days, or time, for one last battle with Ahriman. According to the temple priests of Jerusalem, the world was at the end of the age of Aries and at the end of times had indeed arrived, so it made perfect sense that Mithras would have incarnated as Yeshua. Well, what happens is there's this last sacrifice that's done of a man, and God sacrificed himself to stop all the bullshit that had been going on leading up until that point, and we as a people have taken this and conflagrated it all together and made it as one. That's almost the most simple way to put it. But at the age of Aries, we twisted over and became in the age of Pisces, which Jesus shows up with a fish. He's shown on bumpers and everything. He's the fish. He's the fisher of men. Age of Pisces. Now, we're at the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Jesus did say that he would be with us for an age, but funny how that word back in the old Septuagint and stuff comes across as a zodiacal time period, or it's used synonymously. Not that it's a person's age or something like that. The most convincing event that influenced Paul's thinking was yet to come. See, however, this occurred during his journey to Damascus. Whenever the Roman soldier was blinded by an overwhelming light and thrown off of his horse with others, as an interrate lover of Mithras, Paul would have instantly associated the intense light as being a manifestation of his beloved solar deity, and then the voice emerged from the light, calling itself Jeshua, and imploring him not to persecute his followers anymore. Paul knew for certain that Mithras must indeed be synonymous with this Yeshua. A lot of people look at this event where they're thrown from the horses in this bright light, and this sounds something like what we've talked about before with an airbolide event. During the time of year this would have been, it's something like Halloween, and they have their comets that come at nighttime, or witches' brooms, or actually asteroids that fall through and falling stars. The same thing happens earlier in the year, but it comes from the sun. Perhaps even out of a constellation like Leo, which has to do with the sun, and therefore it would have been connected as doing so. And with that flash that went on and scared everybody and boom, 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 it startled the life out of this man. Could have been an airbolide event. When Paul retired from military service soon afterwards, he traveled throughout the Middle East in order to alert the Gentiles of his new discovery that the world's Savior had come and gone. And in the process of his travels, he created the new religion of Christianity. With his new faith, Mithras was fully assimilated into a Jesus aspect, who then wielded the life story, titles and characteristics once solely ascribed to this ancient Persian son. His new titles include one with the Father and the one and only Son of God. Thanks to St. Paul and his Christ myth, the ancient green man received a new suit of clothes as Jesus. The ancient green man could now begin his tenure as one of the most adored religious figures the world has ever known. Let me know what you think down in the comments and the connections that are made here and the others that I've added in. For there are more, and we could roll back through it again on the mysteries of Osiris, Dionysus, and people that spread in the known world and the places that all these people had touched. And these stories that are so similar, they actually have connections. Peace.